In the heart of the French Pyrenees, where the Gave River flows peacefully among the mountains, there is a place that has transformed millions of lives, Lourdes. This sanctuary, born from the meeting of heaven and earth, has become a beacon of hope for a suffering humanity. Here, where the Virgin Mary chose to appear to a humble young girl, an inexhaustible source of grace and healing continues to flow, touching hearts in every corner of the world. Chapter 1. The Divine Call in Lourdes. In the bitter winter of 1858, in an apparently insignificant corner of France, a story began that would forever change the face of the Catholic faith. The writings of Saint Bernadette, preserved in the readings of February 11th, transport us to that crucial moment. One day, I went with 2 other girls to the banks of the Gave River to collect firewood. I heard a noise, I turned toward the meadow, but saw no movement in the trees. I lifted my head and looked toward the grotto. Then I saw a lady dressed in white. She wore a white dress with a sky blue sash at her waist and a golden rose on each foot, the same color as the rosary she carried. Only on the 3rd visit did the lady speak to me and ask if I wanted to return there for 15 days. For 15 days I returned, and the lady appeared to me every day except on Mondays and Fridays. She repeated several times that I should tell the priests to build a chapel there. She commanded me to go to the spring to wash and to pray for the conversion of sinners. Many times I asked her who she was, but she only smiled kindly. Finally, with my arms and eyes raised toward the sky, she told me that she was the Immaculate Conception. The humility of the setting contrasted with the greatness of the message. In the small Pyrenean village, where poverty was a daily companion to its inhabitants, the Mother of God chose to appear. She did not choose a palace or a cathedral, but a rocky, damp grotto, the Grotto of Massabielle, which would become one of the most visited sanctuaries in the world. The first encounter between the Virgin and Bernadette marked the beginning of a series of events that would transform not only the life of a young shepherdess, but also that of millions of pilgrims who, to this day, come to this sacred place in search of comfort, healing, and spiritual renewal. The news of the apparitions quickly spread throughout the village, generating both fascination and skepticism. While some mocked the young seer, others began to sense that something extraordinary was happening in Lourdes. The simplicity and firmness with which Bernadette recounted her encounters with the Lady began to touch the hearts of those who listened. Chapter 2. The little seer of Massabielle. In the small town of Lourdes, in a modest dwelling known as Le Cachot, the dungeon, lived the Soubirous family. François Soubirous, a miller by trade, and his wife Louise, along with their children, faced the harsh reality of poverty that plagued the region. In this environment of material scarcity yet rich in faith, Marie Bernard Soubirous was born and grew up, a girl whom everyone would know as Bernadette. Life in Lourdes during the 19th century was especially hard for working families. Industrialization was only just beginning to reach this remote Pyrenean region, and most of its inhabitants subsisted on the bare minimum. The Soubirous family was no exception. They had gone from owning a prosperous mill to living in an old abandoned prison, converted into their final home after a series of economic setbacks. Bernadette, the eldest of 9 siblings, experienced privations and suffering from an early age. Suffering from chronic asthma and weakened by malnutrition, the little girl found solace in her deep faith and the warmth of her family. Although she could not attend school regularly due to her fragile health and the need to help at home, Bernadette developed a special sensitivity to the spiritual and an unwavering sincerity that impressed everyone who knew her. Her religious education, though interrupted by life circumstances, was deep and genuine. She learned the basic prayers from her mother, and although she could neither read nor write, she easily memorized the teachings of the Catechism. Her personality was marked by an evangelical simplicity and unbreakable honesty. qualities that would later be fundamental in lending credibility to her testimony about the apparitions. In the months preceding the apparitions, nothing in Bernadette's life suggested the extraordinary role she was destined to play. She continued with her daily tasks, helping at home, caring for her younger siblings, and occasionally working as a shepherdess to contribute to the family's livelihood. Yet God had already chosen this simple, pure-hearted girl to be the messenger of the Immaculate Virgin, demonstrating once again that divine greatness is most often revealed through the humble. Chapter 3. The 18 Sacred Apparitions. The cycle of Marian apparitions in Lourdes began on February 11, 1858, on a cold, overcast Thursday that would forever be etched in the history of the Church. Over the following 5 months, the Virgin Mary appeared 18 times to Bernadette Soubirous in the grotto of Massabielle. Each apparition followed a similar pattern. Bernadette would arrive at the grotto, kneel down, take out her rosary, and in the midst of her prayer, her face would transform as she beheld the celestial presence visible only to her. The encounters between the Virgin and Bernadette were characterized by maternal intimacy and profound reverence. The Lady, as Bernadette initially called her, appeared in a natural niche in the rock, dressed in white with a sky-blue sash and a golden rose on each foot. During these apparitions, Bernadette's expression would be transfigured in such a way that the witnesses, unable to see the Virgin, were deeply impressed by the supernatural transformation they observed on the young girl's face. The crowds coming to the grotto grew day by day. What began with a few local curious onlookers soon turned into a manifestation of faith that drew thousands of people. During her ecstasies, Bernadette performed gestures that seemed incomprehensible to those present. She kissed the ground as an act of penance, drank and washed herself with muddy water from a spot where later a crystalline spring would burst forth, and lit a blessed candle that she held in her hands while conversing with the apparition. The reaction of both civil and ecclesiastical authorities ranged from initial skepticism to gradual acceptance. The police repeatedly interrogated Bernadette, doctors examined her, and clergymen subjected her to detailed questioning. Yet, the young girl steadfastly maintained her testimony, responding with a simplicity and coherence that left her interrogators baffled. Neither threats nor promises of reward could alter her account of the events. The last apparition took place on July 16, 1858, the feast day of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. On that occasion, Bernadette stated that the Virgin appeared more beautiful than ever, although she did not utter a single word. This silent farewell marked the end of an extraordinary cycle of celestial manifestations that would transform not only the life of a small French town, but also that of millions of pilgrims in the centuries to come. The authenticity of these apparitions, confirmed by the Church 4 years later, was supported not only by Bernadette's unwavering testimony, but also by the abundant spiritual fruits and miracles that began to manifest in Lourdes. Chapter 4. The Message of Conversion. At the heart of the apparitions in Lourdes, the Virgin Mary conveyed a fundamental message that would resonate through the ages: the call to the conversion of sinners. This message was not new in the history of salvation, but in Lourdes it took on a particular dimension, manifesting through 3 main elements that the Lady asked of Bernadette: prayer, penance, and the symbolic act of drinking and washing in the spring that would miraculously burst forth. The call to prayer was especially embodied in the recitation of the Holy Rosary. During each apparition, Bernadette held her rosary, and the Virgin Mary herself ran her fingers over the beads of her own rosary, without moving her lips, except to say the "Glory be" with the seer. This silent yet significant gesture underscored the importance of contemplation in prayer, teaching that the true power of the rosary lies not only in the repetition of words, but in a deep meditation on the mysteries of Christ's life. The call to penance was particularly moving when the Virgin asked Bernadette to kiss the ground as an act of humility and mortification for sinners. This gesture, which initially puzzled those present, became a powerful symbol of the need for voluntary humility and sacrifice for the conversion of sinners. The lady repeated several times, "Penance, penance, penance," words that would resonate in the hearts of millions of pilgrims in the years to come. The conversion that the Virgin called for in Lourdes was not merely a superficial change in behavior, but a profound transformation of the heart. This call was evident in Bernadette's own attitude, who, despite becoming the center of extraordinary attention, always maintained admirable humility and a sincere concern for the salvation of souls. The seer understood that the extraordinary phenomena she witnessed were not meant for her personal glory, but for the conversion of hearts to God. The impact of this message of conversion extended far beyond the limits of Lourdes and its time. To this day, pilgrims coming to the sanctuary find in it a privileged place for the sacrament of reconciliation. The long lines at confessionals and the numerous conversions that occur in Lourdes stand as testimony to the enduring power of the Virgin's original message. In this way, Lourdes has become an extraordinary center of spiritual renewal, where the call to conversion continues to transform lives, heal souls, and draw the faithful closer to Christ through the intercession of His Immaculate Mother. Chapter 5. The Miraculous Spring. The discovery of the miraculous spring at Lourdes is one of the most moving and symbolic moments of the Marian apparitions. During the 9th apparition on February 25, 1858, the Virgin Mary instructed Bernadette, "Go and drink and wash yourself at the spring." At that moment, no visible spring existed in the grotto of Massabielle. Before the astonished eyes of those present, Bernadette began to dig in the ground with her hands, following the gestural indications of the lady. From that muddy spot, a small trickle of water burst forth, which, to everyone's surprise, became increasingly abundant as the hours passed. Miraculous healings soon began to occur. The first officially documented case was that of Catherine Latapie, a woman whose 2 fingers had become paralyzed after a fall. When she immersed her hand in the newly sprung water, she instantly regained full mobility in her fingers. This event, verified by the doctors of the time, marked the beginning of a series of extraordinary healings that continue to this day. The physicians who examined these cases were baffled by recoveries that defied any scientific explanation. The spring quickly became the center of a devotion that transcended the borders of France. Pilgrims from everywhere began to flock to Lourdes, bringing with them containers to take the water back home. The Church, initially cautious, established strict protocols to verify the reported healings. In 1883, the Bureau of Medical Investigations, Bureau de Constatations Médicales, was created, an institution pioneering in combining scientific rigor with respect for the spiritual experience of pilgrims. The water from the spring, analyzed repeatedly by independent laboratories, does not possess any extraordinary mineral properties that could scientifically explain its curative effects. Its composition is similar to that of any natural spring water in the Pyrenees. This fact has only reinforced the conviction of believers that these healings are true signs of divine intervention through the intercession of the Virgin Mary. The water thus becomes a visible sign of invisible grace, reminding us of the transformative power of baptism and spiritual purification. Today, the spring produces an average of 32,000 liters of water per day, which is distributed through public faucets and feeds the pools where pilgrims may immerse themselves. The ritual of the cleansing bath is carried out with great dignity and respect, providing a deeply moving experience both for the sick and for the volunteers who assist them. Beyond the documented physical healings, countless pilgrims testify to profound spiritual transformations and a renewed inner peace after their contact with Lourdes water, fulfilling the deepest purpose of the apparitions, the conversion of the heart and an encounter with God. Chapter 6. The Revelation of the Immaculate Conception. The culminating moment of the Lourdes apparitions occurred on March 25, 1858, on the Feast of the Annunciation. After several apparitions during which Bernadette had persistently asked the name of the Lady, she finally received the answer that would forever change the history of Lourdes. The Virgin, raising her eyes to heaven and joining her hands in deep humility, declared, "I am the Immaculate Conception," in the local dialect that Bernadette understood. The revelation of this name was particularly significant considering the historical context. Barely 4 years earlier, on December 8, 1854, Pope Pius IX had solemnly proclaimed the dogma of the Immaculate Conception in the papal bull Ineffabilis Deus. This dogma asserted that the Virgin Mary, by a singular privilege of God, and in anticipation of the merits of Jesus Christ, had been preserved free from any stain of original sin from the very moment of her conception. The coincidence between the recent proclamation of the dogma and the Virgin's self-identification in Lourdes could not have been accidental. What was most surprising about this event was that Bernadette, a young illiterate girl who had barely completed her basic catechism, could not understand the meaning of the words she had just heard. So perplexed was she that, fearing she might forget those strange words, she repeated them continuously on her way to the parish priest's house, Father Peyramale. This lack of understanding on Bernadette's part, paradoxically, became one of the most convincing proofs of the authenticity of the apparitions. For how could an uneducated girl invent such a sophisticated theological title? Father Peyramale's reaction upon hearing Bernadette's words was one of profound astonishment. The priest, who until then had maintained a cautious reserve regarding the events in the grotto, began to see these events in a new light. The coincidence between the recent proclamation of the dogma and the Virgin's self-identification constituted a celestial confirmation of the infallibility of the Church's magisterium, especially regarding Marian truths. This revelation definitively transformed the nature of the Lourdes apparitions. What had begun as a series of mystical encounters in a small French town became an event of universal significance for the Catholic Church. The grotto of Massabielle was transformed into a sanctuary where the Immaculate Conception would be venerated in a special way, and where millions of pilgrims would find a privileged place to experience the maternal intercession of Mary. The identification of the Virgin as the Immaculate Conception not only validated the recently proclaimed dogma, but also established Lourdes as a place where the mystery of Mary's original purity would be manifest through both physical and spiritual healings. Chapter 7. The Construction of the Sanctuary. The construction of the Sanctuary of Lourdes began to take shape as a direct response to the command that the Virgin Mary had given to Bernadette. "Go and tell the priests to build a chapel here." This message, repeated several times during the apparitions, initially met with resistance from the local parish priest, Father Peyramale, who demanded concrete evidence of the apparition's authenticity. However, after the revelation of the Virgin's name and the first documented miracles, the construction project began to take shape under the Church's supervision. The first construction works started in 1862 after Monsignor Lawrence, Bishop of Tarbes, published the pastoral letter officially recognizing the apparitions. The first structure built was the crypt, a subterranean church erected directly upon the rock of Massabielle. This choice was not accidental. It symbolized the desire to build God's house upon the very rock where the Virgin had appeared. The crypt was consecrated in 1866, marking the beginning of a series of architectural projects that would completely transform the landscape of Lourdes. The construction of the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, also known as the Upper Basilica, began immediately afterward. This neo-Gothic church, with its elegant spire reaching toward the sky, became the most recognizable symbol of the sanctuary. As the number of pilgrims increased exponentially, the need for larger spaces became apparent. Thus, in 1871, the construction of the Basilica of the Rosary was initiated, a church in a Romanesque Byzantine style located beneath the Upper Basilica. Its Greek cross plan, decorated with 15 chapels dedicated to the mysteries of the Rosary. The development of the sanctuary continued throughout the 20th century, with the construction of the Basilica of St. Pius X, an underground structure that was revolutionary for its time. Inaugurated in 1958, on the centenary of the apparitions, this basilica can accommodate 25,000 people and represents a unique example of modern architecture in the service of faith. Its design, in the form of an inverted ellipse partially buried underground, allows large crowds to participate in liturgical celebrations while maintaining the spiritual intimacy that characterizes Lourdes. Today, the Sanctuary of Lourdes covers 52 hectares and includes 3 basilicas, the Grotto of the Apparitions, the bathing pools, various prayer and reception areas, and extensive green spaces for reflection and contemplation. The layout of these different structures is not random. Everything has been designed to facilitate the flow of pilgrims and create an atmosphere conducive to prayer and meeting with God. The sanctuary receives millions of visitors from around the world each year, making it one of the most important pilgrimage centers in Christendom, where the original vision of a small chapel has transformed into a monumental testimony of faith and Marian devotion. Chapter 8. The Miracles of Lourdes. The miracles of Lourdes are among the most extraordinary testimonies to divine intervention in modern history. Since the first officially documented miraculous healing in 1858, the sanctuary has witnessed thousands of cases of inexplicable recoveries, of which 70 have been officially recognized by the Catholic Church as authentic miracles. This recognition comes only after a rigorous investigative process involving both the medical community and ecclesiastical authorities, establishing a unique standard in the world for verifying supernatural events. The process of verifying a miracle at Lourdes is extremely meticulous and scientific. It all begins at the Bureau of Medical Investigations, where physicians from various specialties and beliefs examine each reported case. For a healing to be considered medically inexplicable, strict criteria must be met. The disease must be serious and organic, with a confirmed diagnosis. The healing must be instantaneous or sudden, with no period of convalescence. It must be complete and definitive, with no relapse, and it must remain inexplicable according to current scientific knowledge. Only after the International Medical Committee of Lourdes confirms these criteria is the case submitted to the evaluation of the ecclesiastical authorities. Among the most notable miracles is the case of Gabriel Gargam, which occurred in 1901. Gargam, a French postal worker, had become paralyzed and was virtually at death's door after a severe railway accident. After spending 2 years bedridden, unable to feed himself normally, and being declared incurable by doctors, he was taken to Lourdes against his will, for he was an agnostic. During a blessing with the Blessed Sacrament, he experienced an instantaneous healing. He got up, walked, and fully recovered all his bodily functions. His case is exhaustively documented, including medical reports from before and after the healing, as well as a follow-up of his health for the next 50 years, for he lived until the age of 83. The documentation of the miracles of Lourdes has evolved with the advances in medicine. Today, each case is supported by extensive medical files, including laboratory analyses, X-rays, CT scans, and all kinds of modern diagnostic tests. This scientific rigor has made Lourdes a unique place where faith and science engage in a constant dialogue. Many skeptical doctors who have participated in the verification process have been impressed by the objectivity and rigor with which these cases are studied, and some have even undergone profound transformations in their own perspectives on the relationship between medicine and the supernatural. However, beyond the spectacular physical healings, the true miracles of Lourdes are often of a spiritual nature. Thousands of pilgrims testify to profound inner transformations, conversions, reconciliations, renewal of faith, and above all, the serene acceptance of suffering when physical healing does not occur. The sanctuary has become a place where the mystery of human pain finds new meaning in the light of faith, and where the maternal presence of Mary comforts and strengthens those who turn to her for help, regardless of whether they experience a miraculous physical healing. Chapter 9. Bernadette's later life. After the apparitions, the life of Bernadette Soubirous took an unexpected turn for many, yet one perfectly in line with her deep spirituality. Far from seeking the fame or recognition that her role as the Virgin's seer might have brought her, Bernadette chose a path of silence and contemplation. In 1866, at the age of 22, she entered the convent of the Sisters of Charity of Nevers, where she became known as Sister Marie Bernard. This decision was not an escape from the world, but the answer to a genuine vocation that had matured in her heart in the years following the apparitions. Bernadette's convent life in Nevers was marked by physical suffering and spiritual trials. She suffered from chronic asthma, bone tuberculosis, and a tumor in her knee that caused her intense pain. Yet she bore these hardships with admirable serenity, even saying, "The Virgin promised me that she would make me happy, not in this world, but in the next." During her years in the convent, she performed various tasks as her health allowed, serving as a nursing aide, a sacristan, and when her condition worsened, devoting herself to embroidery and constant prayer for sinners. Bernadette's humility was especially evident when the sisters or visitors asked her to speak of the apparitions. She responded with simplicity and precision, adding nothing to or omitting any detail of her original testimony, and quickly steered the conversation toward more everyday topics. Her superior, Mother Vauzou, who had initially been skeptical and stern with her, eventually came to recognize the authenticity of her virtue. The seer of Lourdes became a living example of how God's grace can manifest in the simplest, most devoted life. On April 16, 1879, at the age of 35, Bernadette passed away, meeting the lady who had smiled at her in the grotto of Massabielle. Her last words were a prayer to Mary: "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for me, a poor sinner." Her body, exhumed in 1909 and again in 1919 during the beatification process, was found incorrupt and remains so to this day in the chapel of the Nevers convent, where thousands of pilgrims come to venerate her. This extraordinary phenomenon adds to the many signs confirming the sanctity of her life. Bernadette's canonization process culminated on December 8, 1933, when Pope Pius V declared her a saint. The chosen date was not accidental. It coincided with the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception, the title under which the Virgin had identified herself in Lourdes. The life of Saint Bernadette stands as an extraordinary testimony to how God chooses the humble to accomplish his greatest works. Her legacy endures not only in the sanctuary of Lourdes, which she never revisited after the apparitions, but also in the example of a life entirely devoted to God, marked by simplicity, suffering accepted with love, and unwavering fidelity to the mission entrusted to her. Chapter 10. Worldwide Devotion. Devotion to Our Lady of Lourdes spread with extraordinary speed throughout the Catholic world, transcending geographical and cultural boundaries. This phenomenon began even before the Church's official approval of the apparitions, spurred by the testimonies of the first miraculous healings and the profound impression left by Bernadette's story. The construction of replicas of the Grotto of Massabielle in various countries became a tangible manifestation of this universal devotion, creating small Lourdes that allowed the faithful to experience the nearness of the Virgin without having to travel to France. International pilgrimages to Lourdes began to be systematically organized by the late 19th century, facilitated by the development of the railways in Europe. The first large organized groups came from neighboring countries such as Spain, Italy, and Belgium. But soon pilgrims from as far away as America, Asia, and Africa began to arrive. The creation of the Hospitalities of Lourdes in different countries established an international network of volunteers dedicated to facilitating these pilgrimages, especially for the sick and disabled. These organizations, which continue to operate today, are a living testimony to the spirit of service and charity that characterizes devotion to Our Lady of Lourdes. The cultural impact of Lourdes also manifested in the proliferation of artistic, literary, and musical works inspired by the apparitions. Numerous writers, musicians, and visual artists found in the story of Lourdes an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Representations of the Virgin of Lourdes with her characteristic white dress and blue sash became one of the most recognizable Marian images in the world. Modern media, from cinema to the internet, have helped keep the story of Lourdes alive and accessible to new generations, adapting devotional forms to contemporary times. The universality of devotion to Our Lady of Lourdes is reflected in the diversity of pilgrims who visit the sanctuary. On any given day, one can hear prayers in dozens of different languages, see groups of pilgrims in their traditional attire, and witness expressions of faith that combine universal Catholic tradition with local cultural elements. This diversity not only enriches the pilgrimage experience, but also demonstrates how the message of Lourdes, the call to conversion, prayer, and penance, resonates across all cultures and human conditions. A particularly significant aspect of worldwide devotion to Our Lady of Lourdes is its impact on caring for the sick and suffering. Hospitals, clinics, and health centers around the world bear the name of Our Lady of Lourdes, combining modern medical care with the spiritual dimension of caring for the ill. The annual celebration of World Day of the Sick, instituted by Pope John Paul II and symbolically set on February 11th, the anniversary of the first apparition in Lourdes, has reinforced this link between Marian devotion and the Church's ministry of healing. Thus, in the 21st century, Lourdes remains a beacon of hope and a testimony to the maternal presence of Mary in the life of the Universal Church. Concluding chapter, The Eternal Legacy of Lourdes. The message of Lourdes, which began in the humble grotto of Massabielle more than 160 years ago, continues to resonate with extraordinary force in the heart of the Church and the world. Through a poor, illiterate young girl, the Virgin Mary transmitted a universal message of hope, healing, and conversion that transcends time and cultures. The story of Lourdes is a living testimony to how God chooses the small and humble to manifest His greatness. The sanctuary of Lourdes has become a place where heaven and earth tangibly meet. In its miraculous waters, in the silence of the grotto, in processions illuminated by thousands of candles, and in Eucharistic celebrations, millions of pilgrims have found and continue to find comfort, peace, and spiritual renewal. It is a place where the sick are treated with special dignity, where volunteers learn the true meaning of Christian service, and where miracles, both physical and spiritual, continue to occur. The testimony of Saint Bernadette, in its simplicity and authenticity, remains a model of fidelity and dedication. Her life after the apparitions, marked by physical suffering, yet also by deep inner peace, teaches us that true happiness does not lie in earthly glories, but in the faithful response to God's call. Her incorrupt body, preserved in nevers, stands as a permanent sign of the truth of her testimony and of God's special favor toward the humble. Devotion to Our Lady of Lourdes has transcended all borders, becoming a truly universal phenomenon in the Catholic faith. The replicas of the grotto scattered around the world, international pilgrimages, and the dedication of countless health institutions to the Virgin of Lourdes testify to the enduring relevance of her message in today's world. In a world marked by materialism, individualism, and the loss of the sacred, Lourdes remains a beacon of hope and a reminder of the spiritual realities that give true meaning to our existence. The call to conversion, prayer, and penance that the Virgin transmitted to Bernadette is as urgent and necessary today as it was in 1858. Lourdes reminds us that, even in the midst of our illnesses and suffering, we have a Heavenly Mother who intercedes for us and guides us to her Son, the source of all healing and salvation. Prayer to Our Lady of Lourdes. Under your protection we seek refuge, Immaculate Virgin of Lourdes, who are the perfect model of creation according to God's original plan. On this day, we entrust to you the sick, the elderly, and the lonely. Ease their suffering, dry their tears, and grant each the strength necessary to carry out the will of God. Be the shelter for all who, day after day, alleviate the suffering of these brothers and sisters, and help us grow in the knowledge of Christ, who, with his death and resurrection, conquered the power of evil and death.